Well, good afternoon, and this is the third session of the Biblical Astronomy Seminar, and we're going to be getting into recent celestial signs and events that point to the soon return of our Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ. I'm going to start here in 1604. Let me get the slideshow going here. And because there's a very interesting event that occurred at this time. On October the 1st, 1604, if I could show this chart, please. On October the 1st, 1604, there was a very unique massing of planets Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn in Ophiuchus. This is where the battle is. This is the conflict between the woman's seed and the serpent seed. And this is a very interesting place for this to occur because usually when, as I mentioned earlier, when a Jupiter, Mars, Saturn massing occurs, it represents spiritual warfare in the heavens or in the earth, or both. So we're starting off here with a Jupiter, Mars, Saturn massing. And then it is on October the 25th, 1604, that we have Saturn on one side of this foot and Jupiter on the other, and you have a nice crescent moon over in this area here in the evening sky. I believe it's the first crescent light of the new moon, if I'm not mistaken. Now, on this evening, if you were looking in the sky, you would see Jupiter and Saturn here, then all of a sudden, in this area here, boom, a new star will appear. Very bright new star. It was a big supernova. It's called Kepler's star. It exploded at that time in the heavens. This is where it went off. And it went off right between Zedek, Yahweh our righteousness, and Satan. It's like a battle going on, and the star just exploded right between the two of them. I'm going to show you this without the constellation lines. Here's what the stars would look like. This is as seen from the Mount of Olives. I went to the Mount of Olives on this one. But here's Jupiter, and here's Saturn. You'd be looking, stargazing, and all of a sudden you'd see this. And that stayed around for about a year and a half. It was a very bright supernova. It was brighter than Jupiter. It was very bright. It was called Kepler's star. And Kepler wrote about it at that time. He was a biblical astronomer too, as well as being an astronomer. But in his writings, he said he did not believe that was talking about, that this was expressing the second advent of Christ. That was in his writings. That's what he said. He didn't think that the second advent was soon to come about. If I was there, I probably would have thought otherwise. I would have thought, because this is happening in the area of the conflict, and you see Jupiter and Saturn, and all of a sudden between them this bright new star comes about. This is in the area of the conflict or the war. And what was interesting in 1604 is when the King James Bible was commissioned to be written. So a lot of things were going on at this time period. It wasn't written until 1611, but it was commissioned to be written in 1604. Now, during this time period, is when soon after that, around 1620, is when the Puritans from England came over to the northeast United States. So all this, the United States had its beginnings and the people coming over at this time. And they were founded on believing in the Bible and the Torah. And my great-great-great-grandfathers, William Wadsworth, he came over here in 1632 on a ship called the Lion. But he settled in Hartford. He was one of the founders of Hartford, Connecticut. But he had the writings then showing that they were going by the laws of the Torah, and that's what they were believing in. As a matter of fact, my grandfather, he wouldn't read the Torah. He'd just read the New Testament. And every time the teacher would come, this is in his writing, the teacher would come around once a week and try to get him to read the Torah, and he wouldn't do it. And he'd argue back with him, well, if you take your laws from the Jews, you shouldn't tax them then. So he's against taxing the Jews. That just goes to show that there were Jews there also. And they got along good. My mother's side of the family also, they were in the 1700s in New York, and there was writings of them getting along with the Jews and the Puritans. They all got along good. The Jews also escaped Europe, escaped the persecution at that time. But they're all founded on biblical principles. That's what this nation was founded on, and freedom from the Church of England and their rules. So this is a very heavy spiritual battle, and they had brought the King James Bible over with them. So this all stemmed in the spiritual battle from, I believe it was portrayed in the heavens in 1604, and it came through to 1611 and came through to 1620, and this is where the spiritual battle led to, I think, was a winning of a certain battle, and that's where the United States came out of. It was originally formed. and by Bible-believing people who came to this country to form it. And so just think where the planet would be right now if it wasn't for this country and the believers in it. If we didn't have the spiritual freedom I wouldn't be able to talk about this. If I wasn't, we had the Church of England to worry about, or about getting crucified or burnt to the stake, you know. But so it's like this is something that we have, and we have the opportunity to bring this to the rest of the world. All of our there's freedom of religion and the freedom to worship Yahweh, the way by our heart thinks it's our fellowship between us and Him, and no one can tell us what to do otherwise. It's always between you and Yahweh. You know, when it comes down to it, it's not a religion of man. It's His freedom to worship Him as your God, and your daughters and sons, and it's a family. It's not so much a religion and hierarchies and everything else. But at any rate, it's unique to see this come to the United States. It was around this time. That's what I think the spiritual battle was all about. Was the word of the Messiah, the word of God. It first came to the King James version, which was it was the best version of the time, I think. It may not be the best version today, but I don't know. It's still a good version. I still read it. So, but there are some good things coming out of this. So that's just to show you what was going on at that time. Now in 1995, we're going to start here, November 2nd, 1995, Jupiter and Mars were in this area that were, again, I'm trying to show here. Oh yeah. On November 2nd, 1995, we have a Mars-Antares conjunction. And this is in the Scorpion. So we have Mars and anti-Mars. And Jupiter is also in the Scorpion. This is like the great conflict. At this time I thought, well, maybe the conflict's coming about for the end times. Then there was a massing of Jupiter, Venus, and Mars in the foot of Ophiuchus on November the 18th, 1995. This is what it would look like from the Mount of Olives. And on November the 22nd, there was a very, very close conjunction of Mars, which is Michael, and the bright and morning star above the heel that was wounded. This is very interesting because on November 22nd, there was a big earthquake in Israel, a large one, it was in the Negev. It was I think it was a 6.2 or 6.8, one of the two. 6.8 is a lot larger, but it was about 6.5, let's put it that way. And it was an earthquake that went off in the Negev, but there was a whole lot of shaking going on in Jerusalem. Some of the foundations were shaking and everything. And as you recall, it was on November 2nd, I told you about the conjunction of Mars and Antares. It was 2 days after that Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated in Israel. So they were forming a new government here in Jerusalem, and there was a big earthquake out in the Negev. And this one was when Mars and Venus were very close together in this point here. And they go around the heavens in a circle, and in 2002 they come back together again, and we'll get to this later on. But it's interesting, this is where it starts. Remember I told you the alignment of the heels? Okay, this is actually a heel here, not the end of the foot. And this is where we draw the beginning of the line to the heel of Ophiuchus. And we get to the other side of the heavens that goes down to the Orion, and that alignment. And Venus and Mars come to a very close conjunction at that spot about 7 years later. I'm going to show you this. It's kind of an interesting thing. At that time I thought, well, maybe the end times are coming, because I knew a lot of things coming up in 1996 to 2003 portrayed the Great Tribulation actually happening. It was the biggest portrayal, and I'm about to show you soon, is the biggest portrayal with very rare celestial events occurring in the right constellations at the right times, 1,260-day periods apart, 3.5 years periods apart, and on the biblical feast dates that has ever occurred in history. There's no other time in history where these things have occurred anywhere near this, nor in the next 3,000 to 5,000 years you will not see this again. So this is interesting. Here is without the names. This is Venus and Mars. They're a very close conjunction. Now, in March 25th, 1996, this is a picture of comet Hyakutake. It's a very bright comet. And I saw it quite clearly. I wasn't expecting this comet. I was looking forward to Hellbop the next year, and I get a phone call from a friend, and he says, well, you see the comet? I says, what do you mean, Hellbop? That's not due for another year. He says, no, there's one out there right now. And I've been hearing this on the news for the last, I was writing my book, and I was hearing on the news about this comet, and I thought they were talking about Hellbop all this time. He says, no, there's no one out there now. So I just walked outside, looked up, and there it was, plain as could be, this big old snowball up there. And it was comet Hyakutake. And it was at its closest approach on March 25th, 1996. This is when this picture was taken of it. Now, what's interesting about the comet Hyakutake is the constellations it came through. It first came through Centaurus, which is the despised sin offering. Then it went up through Libra, which is the price which covers, as you recall from earlier. Then it went through Boötes, which means he cometh. Then it went through the Big Dipper, Little Dipper, which are the sheepfolds. He cometh for his sheepfolds. Then it went through Cassiopeia, that's the captive delivered. Remember, Cassiopeia is Andromeda delivered. So he cometh for his sheepfold and to deliver the captive. Then it went down through Perseus, which is the deliverance of the redeemed. So if you take the meaning of this comet and the order of the constellations that went through, it would go something like this. The despised sin offering, the one who paid the price which covers, he cometh for his sheepfolds, to deliver the captive and to deliver the redeemed. That's what it would mean. That's the order it went through. And so now the sages, all the ancient sages of Israel, say that comets and solar eclipses and lunar eclipses are bad omens to Israel. That's because many of the times in history, their history, like the captivities, remember I showed you all the eclipses that were going on during the captivities in 721 BC. There's all those eclipses going on 6 months apart. And then at the time of the 67 AD, when the Jews started fighting against the Romans, which finally led to the destroying of the temple, the Halley's Comet was coming through at that time. So every time something bad happened to them, then there were comets and moons. But it doesn't mean that all comets are bad omens. Some can be good omens. And sometimes they're bad omens to the planet, but they're good omens for God, Yahweh's people, the faithful in Yahweh. To the faithful in Yahweh, they're good omens. So this is the comet. What it was saying, the one who paid the price of covers cometh for his sheepfold to deliver the captive and to deliver the redeemed. So it's all about deliverance. Like the time of Moses in Israel. They were delivered from Pharaoh. It was a time of deliverance. Now, this is on April the 3rd, 1996, in the evening, around 7 o'clock or so in the evening. And here we have Venus up in the Pleiades. Now, the Venus is the bright and morning star, and it's up here with the Pleiades, which are the 7 churches of Revelation. Venus is the bright and morning star, and Jesus says, I am the Lion of the tribe of Judah. The bright and morning star represents Messiah also. But here it is, we have Messiah with the 7 churches of the congregations. And Venus comes up here once every 8 years, to the very day. Every 8 years to the very day, you will find Venus in this spot right here, very near this spot. Here it is, April 3rd, 1996. And you can still see the comet that night in the sky. It was still bright enough to be easily seen, comet Hyakutake. And this, remember, is Messiah coming to judge the earth. That's the theme of Taurus, is Messiah, the coming judge of the earth. Now, here is April 3rd, 1996. This is Venus in the Pleiades. April 3rd, 2004, same day, Venus in the Pleiades. April 3rd, 2012, here it is with the Pleiades. This is the same time of night each time. Here it is, April 23rd, 2020, Venus in the Pleiades. You can see us there every year, 8 years apart to the very day. It has an 8-year cycle. What was neat, this is a picture that was taken, I believe, in the Arizona desert. I don't know exactly, I think it was in Arizona that was taken. On April the 7th, this is like 4 days later. But here you see Venus has moved on from this is Venus here, this is the Pleiades, and this is the comet Hyakutake. Now I looked up on that night, and I could see Hyakutake quite well. What was interesting, so this is what was happening on April the 3rd. The bright and morning star was with his congregation, the seven ecclesia, the 7 ecclesia, the 7 stars of his right hand, mentioned in the book of Revelation. Comet Hyakutake was in the sky. It came through and just said, he's coming to deliver his people. Then at midnight that night, the moon, the seen from Jerusalem, started to go into an eclipse. And it came into full eclipse around 2:50 a.m., and it was a blood red moon. And it occurred in the constellation of Bethula. And remember I showed you where the sun was when Messiah was born? This is exactly, and then this is exactly where the moon was at this night, in line with the womb of the woman. Kind of interesting. Now, This is where it started. At 2:50 a.m. is right about at the middle of the eclipse. So it was at midnight, as you recall, from the book of Exodus, that when Yahweh went out and slew the firstborn of the children of Israel. And that was a final plague that delivered Israel out of their bondage. That was the final plague. So that was a thing of deliverance. And here is, in the very least, is a memorial of that time. It's a blood-red moon representing the blood of the Lamb again. It is about midnight. It starts to go in eclipse. It's not a blood-red moon at midnight, but it's just the shadow of the earth starts to pass over the moon at midnight. And this is where it is about midnight. Then it moves down through here in the middle of the eclipse. Then it stops. Then it goes out of eclipse about here. So you can see it's like a birthing coming out of the womb here. It's like some type of a birthing of Israel. Okay. Now you recall at the captivities. These are the constellations that the eclipses were occurring back then when Israel was going into captivity. So this is sort of like coming out of captivity, I believe, because he's delivering, because the comment already said they're delivering his people. And Exodus 12:29, it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. So it was at about midnight. It's at midnight. Doesn't mean it's our 12 midnight, because they didn't have clocks back then, but it was close enough to our midnight. And this is what the moon looked like. This is a picture of the moon from Jerusalem. There's a blood-red moon that evening. It was actually a deeper red than this. Doesn't come out. The colors doesn't come out good on the screen. But it was a very deep red, blood-red moon as seen in Jerusalem on the Passover night. This is the Passover. It's a blood-red moon. And here we have the blood representing the Messiah and the blood of the Lamb. Then, and at the same night, the sun was in Pisces with Mars, Saturn, and Mercury. When there's a lunar eclipse, if the moon is in Bethula, then the sun is in Pisces. If the moon is in Pisces, then the sun is in Bethula. They are both representing of Israel. Here it is representing Israel coming out of captivity. So that was a very interesting evening with the comet coming through first. You still see the comet that night. Venus with the Pleiades. Then you had the moon turning blood red right at the Passover at midnight. It came in through. It was in Bethula, same place where the sun was, Messiah was born. So these are very interesting events for one evening that was going on. Then on September the 27th, there was this is on just before Tabernacles. Tabernacles started. This is in the morning, and Tabernacles started that evening. There was another eclipse of the moon. And at this time, the moon was in conjunction with Saturn, which represents Satan, and is between Israel and the beast from the sea. This was on September 27th at that time. And I actually believed that the tribulation was going to start around this. At this time, I thought it was going to start. What was interesting, they had an incident that did occur on the Temple Mount because they dug the tunnel. And all of a sudden, all heck broke loose, and the PLO were fighting against the Palestinians all throughout the land of Israel. And boy, I thought it was really coming down because Syrian troops were moving in from one part, Iraqi troops were moving in, and all of a sudden it just got really heavy over there in a 24-hour period. And it was right at this time we were supposed to start, and I saw this coming. And I looked at the newspaper. I was at a friend's house. We were going to go out and look at the clips at somebody else's house. I saw the paper on the table, and they had the lunar eclipse tonight, and it had a picture of the moon and lunar eclipse, and just beneath it, it had a machine gun nest on the Temple Mount. And I was saying, boy, these things are coming down, you know. But after a few weeks, it seemed to quiet down really quick. It may have been meant to start at that time, and Yahweh decided not to, because it sort of supernaturally just stopped. But at any rate, this is a very rare event when you have a total eclipse of the moon in conjunction with Saturn. That only happens about once every 1,000 years. So that is a very unique event here. We have the full moon in conjunction with Saturn in the constellation of Pisces. That's a very rare event. So here's another rare event with the eclipse. And every year, from late September to late October, early November, this is what you see from Israel. This is a portrayal of Revelation 12, where it talks about Michael going against his angels going against the devil, the dragon, and his angels, and the dragon being cast to the earth, and you'll see the beast from the sea on one side coming up. I'll show you what this is. I'll just go through it. This is where the Draco is, 6 o'clock in the evening It is getting dark. It's about an hour after sunset, looking north from Jerusalem. And out of the Complete Jewish Bible, Revelation 12, 7 through 8, next there was a battle in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But it was not strong enough to win, so that there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And early in the morning, through the night, this dragon comes down further and further towards the earth. And at 5:20 in the morning, this is where the dragon is. This is a portrayal of the dragon being cast to the earth. And it says, the great dragon was thrown out, the ancient serpent, also known as the devil and Satan, the adversary, the deceiver of the whole world. He was hurled down to the earth, and his angels were hurled down with him. Revelation 12:9. King James Bible, or this is Complete Jewish Bible. So this is a portrayal of this. Every year this happens during the fall feast of the Lord, as seen from Israel. You can see this from the United States also, but this is as seen from Jerusalem, looking north. The dragon is cast down to the earth, and this is shown during that fall time area between late September and early November. Now, and I'm going to show you some other things here. In the spring, you have something similar. This is the morning sky here, ends in, but that is in the evening sky, and that shows the dragon ascending into heaven. So this is the only time you see the dragon being cast down to the heavens, is this time of the year. This is September, this is during the fall feast, between Feast of Trumpets and the last great day of Tabernacles. Then the same morning, at 5:20 in the morning, or 5:10 in the morning, after the dragon is cast down, you see it in the north, you see him, you look off towards the Mediterranean Sea. This is looking south of west. And here you see Cetus, the beast from sea, standing on the seashore, looking off towards the Mediterranean Sea from Jerusalem. And it is written in the Complete Jewish Bible, then the dragon stood on the seashore. And you see this portrayal here. First you see the dragon being cast down, and at the same moment you see him hit the earth, or his head down below the earth. You look over towards the Mediterranean, and it's starting to get daylight, but you see the beast from the sea, standing on the sea. Standing on the seashore, looking from Jerusalem, south of west. Then you look on the other side of Jerusalem. This would be south of east. South of east, looking from Jerusalem, you'd be looking over the Dead Sea. And it is written, and I saw a beast coming up out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads. This is Hydra, the water serpent. This is the water beast, and he's rising up out of the sea because he's rising in the east. He's rising up. And the ancient pictures of Hydra, he had many heads. And the depiction, we're going to depict him with 7 heads. I think he's supposed to have 7 heads. But sometimes we find him with many as 100 heads. Some of the ancient pictures of Hydra, he has as many as 100 heads. But I think 7 heads is correct, and that would fill what this constellation means. But anyway, he's rising up out of the Dead Sea. So this is all of Revelation 12 and 13 being portrayed by the constellations each year. I don't know what John saw when he was on the island of Patmos, but he would be seeing the same thing because they have water on one side and water on the other. He'd be looking towards the north. He'd be seeing basically the same thing as this, if that's what he saw, if it was actually the constellations he was looking at, or it may have been a vision of some sort that he was seeing. It's hard. I wasn't there. I don't know. And at this time, in 1996, when this occurred, Mars was in conjunction with the head of the serpent. This is Michael. It's like the casting down of the dragon was being portrayed at that time. Venus was Alphara, that's the wounding of the serpent. That's the bright morning star. And Mercury was also in conjunction with the serpent. This was going on in the fall of 1996 at the time of Tabernacles, when the eclipse was occurring and everything. And as I saw here, if we go previous one, let's see. This way. As you see here, this is that morning of September 27th, 1996, where the moon is right next to Saturn. And you have the beast from the sea rising, standing on the sea with Satan and a fully eclipsed moon. And it was on October the 12th. I don't have the full picture here. Well, the moon and the sun came into, there's a solar eclipse on October the 12th, with the moon, a partial solar eclipse, where the moon passed in front of the sun partially. So this is a few weeks later, and this was in Bethula, the woman, the faithful of the 12 tribes of Israel. This is what the eclipse would have looked like in the morning. Just a grazing eclipse of the sun. And then a few days later, she was clothed with the sun and the moon beneath her feet. This is the sign to look for during the time of Jacob's trouble. Remember Revelation 12. There's a twofold prophecy there. She's clothed with the sun and moon beneath her feet. Here. Now this is a picture of the comet Hyakutake in March of 1997. Comet Hyakutake came to its closest approach, I think it was around March 25th of that year. Not Hyakutake, Hale-Bopp. I'm stuck on Hyakutake here. This is the comet Hale-Bopp. And it was very bright. Everybody saw this one because it stayed around for a lot longer than Hyakutake. When Hyakutake came through, it passed by closer to the Earth, and it was only visible for like 2 or 3 weeks. When the comet Hale-Bopp came through, it was further than the sun is from the Earth, but it was very big and large, and it was very bright, and it was visible for a period of 4 or 5 months. And most likely everybody saw this comet that I know of, and it was a very interesting comet because it had a double tail, like a blue tail coming off here and a red here. This is a very large comet. This is a picture of it taken in March of 1997. And it was on March, I believe, 25th or 23rd, that this comet was at its closest approach to the Earth, and this is where it was when it came to its closest approach to the Earth. It was in Andromeda. Now, the first comet that came through, remember, said it was about deliverance. It came to deliver the redeemed. And here, it came through Cassiopeia, which is one constellation up here. Here, it came right through the chains of Andromeda. It's like cutting the chains. This is also about deliverance. This is in Andromeda, and I'll show you this in a little bit. Why this comet also is speaking of deliverance. But this is where it was at its closest approach in the constellation of Andromeda, the bound and chained woman. And this was on the evening, I think, of March 23rd, and that morning, just before sunrise, looking towards the west, you see the sky's getting a little light here. There was an eclipse of the moon. So this is the third eclipse, and on the normal or the common Hebrew calendar, this was just before Purim. This is the day before Purim. Actually, Purim started at sunset this night. Now, on the ancient Hebrew calendar, this may have been Passover. I don't have any reports to see if the barley was ripe at the right time at that time, so I cannot tell you for sure if it was Passover, but it may have been Passover. But we do know at least that it was Purim coming up. This is when the closest approach to this comet came and this lunar eclipse. This is the third eclipse. You had the one in the previous Passover, the blood red moon eclipse in Bethula. Then you had the eclipse in Pisces on September 27th. And here's the third eclipse, and this is in Bethula also, on the Purim or Passover of 1997. And the night before this eclipse, the comet Hale-Bopp was as brightest that it was, and it was at its closest approach to the Earth. Kind of interesting, isn't it? These are all on the feast days. Now, this is a chart that I did of the two comets, and one is the path of Comet Hyakutake. This path here is the path of Comet Hyakutake from April 1st to April 30th, 1996. This is the path of Comet Hale-Bopp from April 1st to April 30th, 1997. This mouth isn't moving right, I need some more room. So this is the path of Hyakutake and the path of Hale-Bopp. And where these two comets crossed, right here in this spot, they crossed at this point 1 year apart on the very same day. On April 10th, 1996 and April 10th, 1997, both of these comets were in the very same spot in the heavens. What's interesting about this spot is this is where it was. This red area here was in between the eyes and in the forehead of Rosh Satan. Now remember earlier when we talked about the constellations, that this constellation was foreshadowed by David when he took out Goliath. He took the slingshot and he slung the shot and hit him between the eyes and the forehead, knocked him down. Then he went out and took Goliath's sword and took his head off and then held it in the air. And this constellation also represents the Messiah when he comes back to take out the beast who's coming up against his people. It is interesting because David was a shepherd. He was anointed king. And he was anointed king even though Saul was the acting king when he came up against Goliath. So his first act as king was to take out the beast that was coming up against his people, Israel. Yeshua is a shepherd, and now he's a king. And his first act when he returns to the earth as king is to take out the beast who is coming up against his people, Israel. See the foreshadowing of the two. It was interesting. This is where the two comets cross, and this is where David hit Goliath with the stone when he took him down. This also represents the Messiah going up against the beast. This head here in Hebrew again is Rosh Satan. And this star, Elgo, means the ghoul, Elgu. And this is very rare for this to happen. For one thing, we have two very bright comets, 1 year apart. That's rare in itself and an awesome thing. But then they come and they form a cross, and where those cross point met was right in between the eyes and in the forehead. This happened to be in this spot here. I mean, it couldn't be more perfect. This is just an amazing sign, especially when you consider the signs of the eclipses that are going on at this time, and the sign where the comet came through to deliver his people, and this is Messiah delivering his people here. It's all about deliverance. It's all about his deliverance of his people from the beast from the sea, because it could be Egypt, Babylon as a figurative, but he's delivering his people. This is what this is all about. And remember, it was in 722 BC, we saw Israel going into bondage or into affliction with the eclipses in the same constellations. Now here is another picture of this. This is off my astronomy program. And this had just a little hair off. It's good enough. Here's the two eyes. This is Comet Hyakutake, because this gives you this is from the astronomy program that shows where Hyakutake is on April 10th, 1996. Here's Comet Hale-Bopp on April 10th, 1997. Isn't that pretty neat? Hyakutake, April 10th, 1996. Comet Hale-Bopp, April 10th, 1997. Looks like this beam of light coming out. You ever see these spooky movies where they get the vampire and all of a sudden this light comes pouring out of his head and he starts killing him. He starts yelling. This guy's got his mouth wide open, screaming, you know. He's not going quietly, I guess. But it's very interesting how these comets came through here. This is all about deliverance. I put the two eyes here. You can see where the eyes are. Goo. The goo is getting gooed. He's getting And here it is. I have it 1 Samuel. David put his hand in the bag and took thence a stone. It's 1 Samuel 17:49, and slang it and smote the Philistine in the forehead. And the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. Now, the following autumn, on September the 16th, this is just before Sukkot again, if you go by the one calendar, but it's 1 month before Sukkot if you go by the other. There's another eclipse of the moon. This is a total eclipse seen from Israel. So here's 4 eclipses and 4 feasts, and 2 comets in between and everything else going on. So there's amazing things going on here at this time. Like I said, these kind of events still don't happen all the time. And here you got a bunch of them happening over this period of time. We're not done yet, because we're going into the year 2000. There were some other events that occurred between 1997 and 2000, but I'm just not going to get into those. I'm going to go into the major events that occurred around this time. Now, it's March 25th, 2000. This is in the constellation of Aries. Remember, this represents the Messiah coming back with thousands of saints, taking out the beast. This is all in this constellation. The bride making herself ready, as we discussed earlier. So this has to do with Revelation chapters 19 and 20. This is 3.5 years later after Revelation 12. And this is 3.5 years later from the signs of the fall of 1996. This is 3.5 years later. We have Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn lining up, ready to go into the first equidistant massing. This is how they appeared at this time. Now, the last time that Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn were massed in Aries was about 2,000 years ago. I think it was in the year 79 or something like that. But so it's a very rare event here, too. And as I said before, Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn, when they're massed like this, it represents spiritual warfare, heavy spiritual warfare. Here I thought it was going to be Armageddon, but it didn't happen that way. Looking forward from 1993, guys, thinking we're going to have 3.5 years and Armageddon was coming down, but it didn't happen at this time. Didn't happen at this time. And here we have the beast from the sea and Rosh Satan. Up here, this is the head of the Satan. This is Menkar. And we have this massing here. This appeared to be the date that Armageddon would start, and some days later, we had this on April the 16th. This is 5 days later. Actually, we first is 6 days altogether. We have the star Menkar, Saturn, Mars here. Now this is the celestial longitudinal line. It passes right through them here. And here's the line here. And they are all in conjunction here. And this is a very rare event also. This happens about once every 1,000 years or so, maybe 3 times in 2,000 years. But this is the closest one that I've seen in the last 2,000 years. I checked them all. I spent thousands of hours checking to see how rare these things were. This is very rare also. So we have Mars, Michael, over Saturn, Satan, over Menkar, the bound or chained enemy. So this is like 5 days after Armageddon was portrayed. It shows the beast, the dragon, being bound. So all these signs were going on. I thought it was coming down when I first saw these. Not only did these line up, Menkar, the bound or chained enemy, Saturn, and Mars, but if you extend this line, this longitudinal line to the North Pole, it also passes through the same spot where the 2 comets crossed in 1996 and 97 and raw Satan. This is just incredible stuff here. I mean, the alignment, then the line up, if you took this line actually from Menkar is in conjunction with this spot. I just noticed that one time. Then I saw these two, and I went, wow, this is amazing for them to be all in alignment like this with the 2 comets crossed. This is like big confirmation time here. And then it was on April, here's what it would look like without the pictures. But here it was on April 19th, 2000. This was passed over on the popular calendar, but April 19th. And this is another equidistant massing of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. They're almost equidistant. But by going by the first crescent light of the new moon sighting to go by the calendar, which is the ancient calendar, Passover that year would have been April 20th, 2000. And we see even the closer, excuse me, I went back too far. And we see even more equidistant massing of these 3 planets. This was on the Passover. Again, this massing in Aries has not occurred in nearly 2,000 years. There it was on the Passover of 2000. This is 3.5 years after the events of 1996. A very rare massing. And this is going on in Aries, which represents Revelation 19 and 20, and the beast of the sea being bound, the beast being thrown into the lake of fire. So all these things are going on here, and it's like to see a few of these events over a 10-year period or a 20-year period would be something, but to see all these events in a 3.5-year period or 4-year period is an amazing thing. And we're not done yet, because we're going to go into 2003 over a 7-year period. On June 1st, we had the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, and the moon was in Taurus. This would have represented the wrath of God being poured forth this time, but it didn't happen, fortunately, actually. And, I was going out teaching these things in the autumn of 1996 before these things came down. I taught at the Prophecy Club actually on the Feast of Trumpets that year, and in 2 weeks I knew these things were coming down. And I told people these things are heavy, signs are heavy in the heavens, but it remains to be seen that these are actually going to take place on the earth. I'm not sure if this actually, this stuff, I believed that they were going to happen myself. But I said that remains to be seen, we'll see what happens, but these are very heavy, be prepared in case it does come down. But I believed it was going to happen because there's just nothing else like this over the last 4,000 years, and nothing like this in the next 3. So I believe that these things are going to happen. And so after the fall of 96 went away, it was in 97, and before Comet Hale-Bopp was actually at its closest approach to the Earth, because I was aware of the crossing of the 2 comets about 1.5 years before it happened through my astronomy programs. So I was a year that it was going to happen. But I was outside, and I was in prayer to Yahweh. I looked up in the sky. I didn't call him Yahweh then. I called him God, my Father, But I was in prayer, and I said, are these your signs? Because if they're just coming out of my head, I don't want to be out here talking about these things, since they're coming from me and not from you. And then I was saying, are these your signs? And what happened here? It's like, I was like playing Jonah, Jonah says, well, why didn't you take the judgment on Nineveh, And but that's it was sort of like that. And then I was looking up in the sky, and I was asking him if it was his signs. And I said, these are not your signs. I'm going to get out of this and do it no more. And all of a sudden, from the east to the west, I saw this bright meteor. The brightest meteor I've ever seen. It was high in the sky, but it was big and bright. It came blazing across the sky. It was very bright white. I've never seen anything like it. And it went over, there was even close to a full moon that night. I don't know the date, I don't remember it, but it was close to a full moon, and the meteor sort of outshone the moon and you could see it clearly in the sky, and it had a trail on it, it went across. So I'm looking up, and my mouth opened a bit, because I wasn't saying these things, I was thinking in my head, I was asking, what are these signs? Are these signs yours? And all of a sudden, That came through. And I'm looking up at it, and if that wasn't enough, 10 seconds later, another meteor came from the south to the north and crossed over where that meteor went. And it was just as bright. I mean, it's very odd to see a meteor coming from the south to the north. You just don't see this. Usually going in the same direction. These were very bright meteors, and they made the cross like the two comets crossed. And it was in the same area in the sky as where the two comets would cross later on that year. And so I'm going like, whoa. And I just went in and sat down. I didn't go to my computer to see where it was in the sky, according to my computer, where the stars were, etc. I didn't write down the day, didn't write down the time. I was just too dumbfounded. I mean, this is all he answered. Like these things he set in motion 6,000 years ago. This is proof that he knows our thoughts. He knew our thoughts even before we were. I mean, he knew that I was going to think that 6,000 years ago. He set these things in motion to come in at that moment. He does that with you too, everybody, not just me. He does that with our thoughts. He knows our thoughts from way back, even before we are. And if that wasn't enough, because when I was doing these things in 1993, I was writing about these things, I had to keep on asking him over and over and over and over, are you sure? Are you sure? He must have got tired of me asking these questions because and I'm looking and checking all my data and making sure it's correct and everything, and double checking, rechecking, because I wanted to make sure that these things were right. And he probably got tired of me trying to confirm these things. But if that wasn't enough, he knows me. It was like September of 1997, about 6 months later, that I did an article in the Biblical Astronomy about the two comets crossing each other the 6 months previous, and what it meant with David and Goliath. I did the whole workup on that. And someone read it, and he wrote back to me, and he sent other people email. And he told me and I didn't tell anybody about the two meteors crossing. I kept that to myself for some time. I didn't tell anybody about that for a couple of years ago, I think. And he said, it was interesting because I was reading the article about the two comets crossing, and I was looking up at the skylight, and I saw this bright meteor pass by. And he nudges his wife and tells her about it. She looks up, and another one passes by and crosses over the other one. So this is what he tells me in his email. And I'm just like my hairs are standing on end because this is what I saw 6 months previous, thinking about the same question if these are his signs, and he was thinking the same question. He was asking him if these were his signs. So this is like another person, not 3,000, but about 2,000 miles away, back east, sees the same thing that I saw when he asked the same question. I didn't tell him about it. So that's double, triple, quadruple confirmation, yes, these are his signs. And then I was tossing and turning. I thought for 2 or 3 days, since I knew all these things that were going on, that I should find the time when he was returning, when these things were going to happen, when the end was coming. And so I thought it was up to me to find these things out for some reason, take it upon myself. And finally, after 2 or 3 days of turning, I heard a little small voice saying, well, let me worry about that. It's not for you to figure that out, but he told me to keep doing what I'm doing. And the two prophets confirmed it. Says to do what you do, no more, no less. 6 months apart, they told me to keep doing. So I believe that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I don't have all the answers, but these are very unique signs that are going on. And, it wasn't to happen this time. Yahweh he's no hurry for these things. He's going to do it when he's going to do it. If I'm going to get into this, it may happen at any time. It could happen next week, tomorrow, but it may not happen for another 40 years. There's a great possibility that that's going to happen that way. And no matter what, though, if we're in him and we have fellowship with him, we're with him anyway. So just keep that in mind. And I was asking him, and he told me that this is a story I got to tell, too. I just got to tell it because this is showing his heart in these matters. And it was in 1974. I was a Christian for a couple of 3 years, and in those days I would go out on the road and see if the Bible was true. I'd take it to the test. I spent a couple of years on the road, traveling throughout the country, and just having faith in God that he's going to take care of me. No matter what. I go without money, I go without coat, I just believe the scriptures, and he'd always come through. I mean, doing some amazing things. And it came to a high point, and at one time I went out to the Mojave Desert and did this 40-day fast. That was a Christian thing to do, I guess. It's not that you have to do that to become close to God, but at that time I had to do it for some reason, for my mind. And so I ended up doing that, and I was getting really high, really into the spiritual walk with him, being with him. Some amazing things were going on. And later that spring, I went up into the Shenandoah Mountains for about 5 weeks. And I was living off the land up there, and I was just having the grand old time. As far as I was concerned, I was back in the Garden of Eden. There's nothing. I mean, I didn't know what time it was, what year it was. I mean, I was just being alone with Yahweh and speaking and reading the scriptures every day and studying the scriptures. And if I was hungry, I'd go to the cherry tree and eat some cherries or wild strawberries or green apples. It was the springtime. The green apples were pretty good, actually. And I had a little creek, and I found an abandoned house that he showed me and cleaned out the room. And I had a bed there and stuff and cleaned it out. And I just spent 6 weeks reading scriptures. I was in the Torah then for some reason. I was going through the genealogies, etc. And after that, he told me I was going into the Marine Corps. Here I am, like a long-haired hippie with hair down the hair and 140 pounds, and so they told me about a year ahead of that time I was going to the Marine Corps. So I went to Washington, D.C. to enlist in the Marines. They took one look at me and sort of shook their heads, but they let me come in and sign up for them. I didn't have any identification on me because I didn't carry identification on me. I was a son of God, I believed, and so I had to order my identification. Anyway, while I was waiting for these things, I was in Washington, D.C. I was in the park, and there was the Vietnam Veterans Against the War there at that time. I was carried away in the Spirit on this day. And I looked around Washington, D.C., and no matter where I looked, there was nobody who was into Messiah, into God. I mean, I understood who he was and where he was coming from. And if people actually knew who he was, they'd be flocking to him. They really don't know who he is. I mean, it's like what he has in store for his people is amazing. And if people actually knew where he's coming from, they knew where it was coming on, they'd be flocking. You couldn't hold him back from him. But nobody, they're all concerned in their own thing. There was nobody there with the Spirit, filled with the Spirit or anything. And I was concerned about that. And I was saying, are these the last days? I was asking him, because I felt it was 1974. And this was Washington, D.C. at that time. Watergate was coming down with Nixon. The ticker tapes were running around the Smithsonian. But I felt that something was coming down because I was carried up in the Spirit, and I could see other people. Later on, I'd be walking by people. I knew who was in the Spirit because our spirits would like leap out at each other. The spiritual thing was interesting. And I was carried away. It was like being 2 million years from now in the body in 1974. It's kind of hard to explain. It's like being 2 million years in the future, but still being in 1974. And I thought that the times were coming back, that I would stay with him, because I was beyond sin and temptation. I didn't want to come back to the planet. This 1974 in reality, because I didn't want to sin against him anymore. I knew if I came back, I would sin, 7 times worse than I did before. That actually happened. But I didn't want to leave him. He says, well, no matter what happens, you will be back with me here, no matter what happens. And I says, well, is this the last days? And can we go now? And he says, well, I'll give it to you. He says, how long would you wait to save one soul? How long would the wait how long would it be worthwhile waiting to save one soul? And I thought about it because I knew how much I could see the kingdom, and I knew what it was. I know how he loves us. I know that the love that exists there. And I said, gosh, that's at least 1,000 years more. I mean, that's nothing to wait, because when we're there, all the things that were previous go like a flash anyway. So that's his heart. He wants to wait to all to be saved. That's what I saw there. This is 1974. So 1997 comes around. This is like a little over 6 months after I went out and saw the 2 meteors. There was the Promise Keepers meeting in Washington, D.C. At that time, there was over 1.5 million Christian men showed up. It was bigger than anything Jerusalem have ever seen. Everybody was going to God and repenting before him. We had Orthodox Jews there, Christians there, Messianic Jews. It was an amazing time. And the Promise Keepers was just the people who were holding it, but Yahweh had his plans. So that morning, it was on Saturday morning, and that was actually the Feast of Trumpets that day. And it was the beginning of the 2,000th year of Messiah, because he was born in 3 BC. This was the beginning of his 2,000th year. Not too many people knew that. I knew that day. And it was also a year of the Jubilee. And so I was getting all excited, and I'm sitting by a tree. I was standing by this tree in the morning in front of the stage, and all of a sudden I felt this warmth that I hadn't felt in a long time come up, and I knew it was Jesus coming up. And I said, boy. And I'm looking around, and all I can see all the way around me is Spirit-filled Christians. I was standing in that same spot in 1974. There was nobody. And all of a sudden this voice comes up behind me and says, well, it's a good thing we waited, isn't it? And I'm going, whoa. It's all like, it's like, and all you can see is Spirit-filled Christians all the way around. And it was just an amazing thing. And he was not saying only it's a good thing we waited then, it's a good thing we didn't take off in 1997 too, or 96, because there's work to be done here on the earth yet. And boy, that's his heart. He wants people to be saved. So if it happens tomorrow, if it happens 40 years from now, if we're in the will of Yahweh, we'll be joyful either way. And I just wanted to share that with you because that's his heart, I believe. That's what I can testify to, that's his heart, where he's coming from. Now, here's a conjunction of the moon and Jupiter and Saturn in June of 2000. And at that year in 2000, we also had these signs. This is in late fall. She's cold with the sun and the moon beneath her feet. This is on September 30th, 2000. This is when the other infantata started. Remember when Yeshua went up on the Temple Mount and started everything is going. So all the time when this happens in the late fall, it's also happened at the time of the Yom Kippur War in 1973. When the Feast of the Trumpets and such occurs in the late part of the fall, this is where this sign can occur, where she's cold with the sun and the moon beneath her feet. And it seems like a lot of times when this occurs, trouble comes down to Israel. Of course, this is the time of Jacob's trouble, so it seems to work out that way. And here is a galactic view. She's clothed with the sun is here, and the moon beneath her feet. And that time, same thing happened. The dragon was in the sky. This is September 28th. In the evening, September 28th, the morning is cast down. You see the beast in the sea on the one side standing on the seashore, and you see the other beast coming up out of the sea on the other. This was going on at September 28th, 29th, and 30th, and that's when the infantata started. That's when that occurred. That's when Yeshua went up on the Temple Mount, proclaimed some things that got them all shook up, and that's when there was an infantata for many years, because it's still sort of into that, but not as bad as it was for the first 3 or 4 years. There's a lot of bloodshed over that one. I'm not going to get into this one here. And then this is in 2002. This is another comet that came through, but it was not as bright as Hale-Bopp or Hyakutake. Matter of fact, most people didn't see this. This is about probably a 2-second magnitude to it's a third to fourth magnitude comet it was. And it came through these areas when it started off down here on February 2nd of that year. It moved up through Pisces. Then it went through Andromeda. This is where it was during the Passover. This is a Keizang. And during the Passover season of 2002, this is around late March, early April. Actually, that was right here when they had that. Remember the Passover massacre that happened in Israel in 2002? This is where Keizang was during that time. So this is sort of bringing a bad open. This one, in a sense, it was. We think it was, but we'll see later on what this comet actually does. It's traveling through this area here through April. Then it moved up through Cassiopeia and Cepheus. And then on May 7th, it was actually right between the foot of the woman's seed, the Hercules, and the dragon. This is where the comet passed through. This is very interesting because it was this time in May that I had also been looking forward to for many years, and I didn't know about this comet in 1993 neither. But this is a date that I was looking forward to because there's going to be some heavy things going on in Taurus at this time. And here's another comet that came through at that time also. There's two of them that came through very close together. This is comet Utsunomiya. It was also like a third magnitude comet. And it came through down the other way through Andromeda. As the other comet was leaving Andromeda, this comet was coming through Andromeda, and it moved down through into Taurus here. You see this on May 4th, May 5th, and May 6th. And it was right in the midst of the head of Taurus when all these other things were coming out at the same time. This is something I'll show you here what I was looking forward to. It was on May 3rd that these planets started massing the head of Taurus. And we have Mercury here, and the comet actually passed right over Mercury at that time. If you had a large telescope, you may have seen something like this, the comet on top of Mercury. Okay, so it looks like Mercury with a tail, doesn't it? And it came next to the eye of Taurus. This is the other side. This is Aldebaran, the red eye, and this is the comet. And you can see on May 6th, this is where you have equidistant massing of Saturn, Venus, and Mars in the head of Taurus. This is the first time this has happened since April 1st of 2 BC when the Messiah was born. This also represents the deliverer of Israel. He's also the Messiah coming to judge the earth, and this represents the deliverer of Israel. And here's the actual picture of March 31st, 2 BC of these planets up in this part of the head of Taurus. That's the last time this occurred with these three planets being in the head. It's kind of interesting. It's around the birth of the Messiah. And on May 7th, 2002, we had the comet right in the eye here. These are just some unique massings that were going on of these three planets and the comet being in the eye. And then at the same time, on May 7th, looking more to the north and east, you would see Keizang and the heel of Hercules coming down on the dragon's head. Kind of interesting, because he had the prophecies going both ways. And this is where the line, remember the line, the alignment of the heels, where it went to Ophiuchus. And in 1995, you had Venus and Mars very close together. They made their full circuits of heaven over this time. Mars passed this area two or three times. Venus passed it probably 6 times. But at any rate, I was speaking about those conjunctions coming up in 2002. They were very close again. And this is the center of the circle. And here you see Venus and Mars on May 10th, 2002. This is where the line would come down through to align with the heel of Orion, coming down on top of the head of the serpent. And Venus and Mars here is in the close conjunction. It passed right through here. Remember in 1995, Venus and Mars came to a very close conjunction in the heel of Ophiuchus. And on the other side, in 2002, they're in conjunction with the heel of Orion. And in the middle, you got, at the same time, you get the comet and the heel of Hercules in the middle. It's kind of interesting things going on at the same time here. And this has all to do with Messiah, the coming judge of the earth. This is in 2002. These are more recent than 1997. And here's a unique lineup on May 14th. This would have been 2002. This is the 54th anniversary of Israel. When they became a nation in 1948, it was on May 14th. Here we have the lineup between the horns. And this is what it looks like it's seen from the Mount of Olives. All these planets massed here with the moon. This is the first crescent light of the new moon massed here, also with them. A very unique event for the 50th anniversary, the solar anniversary of Israel. It was interesting about May 14th, 1948. If they had gone or known by the ancient calendar that was once used, that would actually be the day of Pentecost in 1948. But their Pentecost was a month later because they go by the Talmudic calculated calendar that was brought up by Hillel in 350 AD. But they went by the way they anciently figured that when Israel became a nation on May 14th, 1948, it was actually the day of Shavuot or Pentecost. So I thought that was neat mentioning. And here was a unique thing with Jupiter and Venus. This occurs about every 81 years. You see, this is a Gemini here. This is the father with the son, or it could also be Messiah with the bride. And they line up like one planet in one figure and the other planet in the other figure. They line up like this about once every 89 years. I remember this was in June, I think, of 2002. It's just a pretty neat little unique little sign. I remember Marcia and I went out to look at this, went to a viewpoint to look at this, and we were looking up there holding hands, watching Jupiter and Venus, I guess. This actually represents the Messiah and his bride. And so I thought we almost wanted to do wedding vows again, you know. We should have, I guess. But that was a unique sign. And then later, this is on June 10th, I believe, that there was an eclipse of the sun between the horns also. So all these things are going on between the horns of Taurus, which represents the Messiah, the coming judge of all the earth at that time. It also represents Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh. Now in 2003, there was a unique massing of Venus, bright morning star, Jupiter, Zedek, the sun, and Regulus, the king star in the Lion of Judah. This is August 22nd, 2003. This is here as Regulus. Actually, later on, there's some unique massings and stuff going on from August 22nd. Throughout that week, there were some unique massings of these planets as they moved through the Lion that week. I don't have those here. Then on August 26, 2003, Mars came to its closest approach to the Earth in the last 26,000 years. Since the creation of Adam, it has not been this close or seen this bright by any man. This is a very unique thing. And this is 7 years after the eclipses of 1996 and 97. Remember we were talking about the captivities of Israel in 722 BC, 720 BC, etc. We had these eclipses that were occurring in Bethula and Pisces. But 7 years before those eclipses, Mars was at its closest approach to the Earth. Here we had the eclipses in these same constellations, and 7 years after Mars was at its closest approach to the Earth. It's like an inversion. It's like 722, they were going into captivity, and in 1996-97, they were coming out of captivity. There was a deliverance of some sort there to Israel. There was actually a punishment given to Israel that was by the prophet Jeremiah laid it aside for 390 days to represent 390 years to the punishment of the 10 northern tribes. But they did not repent, so Yahweh said, I'll punish you 7 more times for not repenting. So 7 times 390 is 2,730 years. There's a 2,730-year punishment to the house of Israel, the 10 tribes. And so what's interesting is from the year of 734 BC, you add 2,730 years to that, and you come to the year 1997, 1998, which was the year of the Jubilee. That was the beginning of the Messiah's 2,000th year. All those things were going on in Washington. I mean, it seems like it was a lot bigger than Promise Keepers, believe me, what was going on there. People were prostrate, repenting to God, repenting to the Lord. This is a great Jubilee year besides, and it was also the end of the punishment to Israel. They were not selected to wrath or anything, but when you do something bad, your parents still punish you. Even though they still love you, you still get to eat or whatever, they still love you, but there's a certain punishment you have to be punished with because he said he was going to punish them. He does not go back on his word. He still punished them. And they came out of this. And I believe this is part of the deliverance that the comments were talking about. This certain punishment was over. This is part of it anyway. And you see this inversion going on here. Then in 2003, November the 9th, we had a blood-red eclipse as seen from Israel in Aries, the ram. This represents the blood of the lamb on the lamb out of Revelation. He was the one that was worthy to, again, I saw a strong angel proclaim with a loud voice, who is worthy to open the book and to loose the seals thereof. And I beheld, and lo, in the midst of the elders stood a lamb as it had been slain. And when we had taken the book of the 24 elders, fell down before the lamb, having one of them harps and golden vials full of odors, which are the prayers of the saints. And they sung a new song, saying, Thou art worthy to take the book and to open the seals thereof, for thou wast slain and hast redeemed us to God by thy blood. And this picture here of a blood-red moon on a ram is a good picture of this part of Revelation, because the blood-red moon represents the blood, and he's the one that his blood, we were redeemed by his blood. Then there's another comment that came through. I'm not going to go through all these comments. They were sort of in 1990 and 2004, I believe. What was interesting about 2004, this one though, there was some interesting things. The Bradfield came in through, this is where the breaking of the bands are, so he's still breaking the bands here. So it comes in through this area here, turns, moves down this way, as seen from Earth, and comes up through this area here. So it's like drawing a circle around these bands here, this comet. At the same time, this is this represents the 10 tribes of Israel. At the same time, over in Judah, we had this other comet coming through this fish at the same time. These 2 comets coming through the fish, one for the 10 tribes and one of Israel and one for Judah. And this comet came through and went through the bands like it was breaking them. So it came right through from the lamb and right through his foot. That is breaking the bands. I thought that was kind of interesting. These are like third magnitude comets. And most people couldn't see them though because they didn't know where to look for them. They weren't as bright as the Hale-Bopp and Hyakutake again. But we had a lot of comets come through in this period of time, from 2000 to now, more than any other time in history. There's a lot of there's third to fifth magnitude comets. We've had a lot of them. A lot of astronomers making comments on this like we've never seen it like this before. And here again, here's one Bradfield. This is on April 21st, 2004. Comet Bradfield was in the one fish, and Linear was in the other. Here we have Ephraim and Judah, or the 10 tribes, and Judah and Benjamin. So these 2 comets are representing, these fishes representing the tribes, with the 2 comets going through. Very interesting signs. This is April 27th, 2004. And this is Comet Neat on May 7th, 2004. It's coming up through Canis Minor, going right up to next to Sirius. This is the path of Comet Neat from April 27th to May 9th, 2004. This is the path of Comet Linear, the other comet, from May 18th to June 1st, 2004. It came through also by Sirius. And both comets actually crossed like this. It wasn't the same day or anything, but it's interesting, their paths crossed just a few weeks apart. And these were 2 bright comets also. They weren't real bright, they were like fourth or fifth magnitude, visible to the naked eye if you knew where to look for them. I couldn't even see them with binoculars. Most of the time you have cloud cover, it was too hazy, or it was too hazy out. You couldn't see them. And the closest approach to linear was in the River of Fire. This is Comet Linear as closest approach on May 17th. And here's the beast from the sea, and here's the River of Fire. And this is where its closest approach was. It was here. And here's another comet, 2003 K4. And it came down this past November. This comet was seen, and it came this is from August 1st to October the 19th here, and to November 11th. It came through during the fall feast. It came right down through the mist of Bethula. These are some of the recent events that have occurred. So this comet came right down through the mist of Bethula, and this again was hard to see with the naked eye. It was supposed to be visible with the naked eye, but it was very hard to see. Everybody didn't see it. At the same time, there was some massings of the planets going on, starting to go on in Bethula. This is September 15th to October 8th. Actually, there's another comet that came through. It came up this way. It was K4. There's also the asteroid Tatuus, which was reaching its closest approach to the Earth for a long time. It's the closest asteroid of this size to come this close to the Earth in recent history. It was actually about distance of 3 lunar orbits from the Earth. It's quite a distance, but kind of close in astronomical terms. This is a picture of it. And it came its closest approach from Sagittarius to Centaurus. This was going on in September. All these things are going on in the fall feast, this passing of this closest asteroid, the comets. And here is the massing of the planets of Jupiter and Mercury are starting to come in September the 27th. This is around the fall feast. You couldn't see these, though. Here's Mercury, Jupiter, and I believe this is, I don't know what this is. It seems like this would be Mercury and this would be Venus. Mars. You have Jupiter, Mercury, and Mars, and the Sun. They were massing up into the shoulder of Bethula. But these could not be seen. All these signs with the comets and the planets that were going on this past fall, they were too close to the Sun to be seen. Kind of interesting. There were signs, but they were hidden signs. So I don't know exactly what they meant. Here's Mercury, Mars, and Jupiter on September the 30th, 2004. And then Venus was in conjunction with Regulus on October 3rd, 2004. I believe that was Tabernacles. And then we have October 13th, 2004, with the Moon and Mercury, Mars, everything spread out, and Comet Linear down here. And 5 minutes after sunset on October 15th, again, she was clothed with the Sun and the Moon beneath her feet, this past fall. Then again, we had another total lunar eclipse a year after the other one. On October 27th and 28th, 2004, we had another blood red moon, but this was visible for the United States. The one the year before that was a blood red moon in the air race was visible from Israel. But this one here was visible from the United States. Actually from Portland, I saw a photograph of it. It looked more like a coppery color to me, but someone took a photo of it, and it had a bloodish red color to it. So this again happened. Actually, eclipses happen every 6 months, lunar eclipses, and they're about a few days behind, or a couple weeks behind because of the way it is. So over a 1 year period, the one eclipse would be here, then the next year the eclipse would be here, and the following year, after a year, it would be over to the right even more. It just moves back each year in this cycle. And at that time also, there's another comet coming through of ASAS. So you had ASAS coming through at the same time Linear was going through, and actually they both crossed at the same time. They came down through and crossed. And on this date, one comet was here and the other comet was here in Bethula. So some kind of interesting comets are going on. As I said, these weren't extremely bright, but there was a lot of them going on from 2000 to now. Here's the closest approach to these two. The one comet Linear was here as ASAS was here on October 7th, 2004, and that was during Tabernacles. And it was in Bethula, which represents the 12 tribes of Israel. These are interesting signs, but I don't know how to interpret them too much. These are unique comets, these are unique things that are going on during the feast dates also. I'm not sure exactly what they mean, though. Even with the hindsight, I don't know what they mean. at this time anyway. Then there was a very close conjunction of Jupiter and Venus on November 5th, 2004. Now we're going to go to the year 2040. Okay. In 2040, there is a celestial event that is going to occur that's going to be the biggest celestial event of the whole millennium. Now, these signs that went from 1996 to 2003, ending with the closest approach of Mars, in 26,000 years, that actually happened on Elu 1, the 40-day countdown to the Day of Atonement, but I forgot to mention that. But from those years, all those events put together are amazing. You don't see these things. As I said, for thousands of years, you would never see these things. It happens, so many events, being so rare, occurring on the feast days, in the right timing, in the right place, with the right constellations, with the two comets coming through. These were amazing signs. Those signs put together are greater than this sign, but this is one sign that is an awesome sign. And as I said, it's the most awesome sign of the whole millennium, of this millennium. The other signs were the last millennium. This is the biggest sign in this millennium and probably the millennium after. You never see a sign like this. Actually, this sign occurs about once every 26,000 years. Because of the precession of the earth, this can only happen about once every 26,000 years. What's going to happen is, you're going to have a grand massing of all the planets. You're going to have Jupiter, Mercury, Venus, Saturn, and Mars, by the Hebrew name Zedek, Ketab, Noga, Sabatini, and Edom. They're all going to be in Bethula, along with the moon, and this moon is the first crescent light of the new moon of the Day of Trumpets. This is the first crescent light of the new moon of the Day of Trumpets. Now, it's thought that Adam was created on the Day of Trumpets in the year 3961 BC. You add 6,000 years, because no year is zero. You cannot. When you're going from the BC dates to the AD dates, there is no year zero. A lot of people make this mistake and they add them in. They get too many, 1 year too many in there. There is no year zero. 1 BC to 1 AD is 1 year. All the astronomy programs will tell you this, the calendar programs. Actually, when you have negative numbers, zero represents 1 BC in calendar programs and in astronomy programs. Zero represents 1 BC. So, if you go from the Feast of Trumpets in the year 3961 BC to the Feast of Trumpets in the year 2040, this is exactly 6,000 years. And this starts, and the Feast of Trumpets of 2040 will start the year 6001. It will start the 7th millennium. 1947 to 1948 was a Jubilee year. When Messiah was born, 3 BC, it was a Jubilee year. When the Exodus occurred, it was a Jubilee year. And 1997, 1998 was a Jubilee year. So the next Jubilee year is year 2047 to 2048. Now, the Messiah is to come, what is called the last Shabuah. Now, a Shabuah is a group, when you use it for Pentecost counting, it's a group of 7, it's a group of weeks. When you use it from Daniel, like some people use the 70 weeks of Daniel to project it to the end times, they're a group of 7 years. The Shabuah is a group of 7 years, 70 weeks of years. And this is called the last Shabuah. And during this time, the last Shabuah is where we're going to have the tribulation period of 3.5 years, the last part of it. But there is to be 7 years from the last Shabuah, so it's from 2040, beginning in 6001. Now this is from the creation of Adam. It is the year 6001 from the creation of Adam. You add 7 years to that, you come to the year 2047. And the beginning of that year is the Jubilee year. And I believe that the Messiah is coming back on a Jubilee year where all things will return to the rightful owners. And I believe that's going to be towards the beginning of the 7th millennium. Now, the counting of these things started from the fall of Adam. Until Adam fell, there was no need of a Messiah. So when Yahweh spoke of these things and doing by these laws, it was by the laws of the Old Testament where if you sold yourself out as a slave, you'd have to work the 6 years, and the 7th year you're set free. So it's by law that this has to occur. The title deed to the earth cannot come back to man. Yahshua has already paid for it, but will not come back until this full period of time has come to pass. So from the fall of Adam, which I believe was 7 years after his creation, there's a 7-year period, to 2047, there is 6,000 years. There is 6,000 years, and then the next year starts the 7th millennium from the fall of Adam. 6,000 years have passed, and the 7th begins, and we are set free in that year. It's a Jubilee year also. That's why the Jubilee years are always on the biblical years that end with 8s. I'll get into this in a minute again. We have a few minutes left here. Here's another picture of this with Bethula, with Jupiter, Mercury, Saturn, Venus, Mars, and the moon in the midst. This is the first crescent light of the new moon. This is on September the 8th. That's the same time on our calendar that Messiah was born in 3 BC, on September the 8th, 3 BC. On the solar calendar, he was born on that date. This is the solar calendar. I have some different pictures of it here, zoomed in. Here it is, what's the picture, how these planets would look. This is the first crescent light of the new moon with the planets around it. It's like a menorah, so to speak. It's pretty interesting. And she's clothed with the sun and the moon beneath her feet on October the 8th of that year also. But this is interesting. Then in 2047, okay, here we come to 2047. This is what happens between 2046 and 2047. Looks a lot like what happened during the Exodus. Jupiter moves through Pisces. Stops, comes back, stops, comes back. Then it moves on to Aries. The only difference here, this is on the October, it goes past Aries into Taurus, then stops and moves back to this point here. And this is where Jupiter is on the last great day. The reason it's going into Taurus here, because after the tribulation, he sets his people free, the Lamb sets his people free. Then towards the end of the tribulation is when the wrath of God comes down. And this is where Jupiter is going into Taurus, because this is the wrath of God. Jupiter would be here. So all this backs this up again. So here we have 2047, and Jupiter is in the right place at the right time. To go back in history and have Jupiter come out at the right place at the right time with exact things between them, it's just hard to do. I didn't do this on purpose. It just happened this way. Then I found Jupiter. Hey, there it is. You just can't come up with these things out of your head. And so this is the path of Jupiter in 2047. So you have your handout, on the back of your handout, on the back page, I have a timeline here. I have the creation of Adam, year 1, and his fall, year 8. From 3961 BC, 3953 BC. Then the flood occurs in 1656 or 7 and ends in 1657 or 8. Jubilees were started to count then, because that didn't start until Moses. But if it was a Jubilee, counting backwards, that would have been a Jubilee year. The birth of Abraham, 2000 biblical year, 2008, that would have been a Jubilee year. Birth of Isaac, 100 years later, 2108, that would have been a biblical year. Birth of Moses, Jubilee year. Birth of Moses was not a Jubilee year. He was born in 2428, but it ends in the 8s. All these things end in the biblical years 8. 8 is the number of Messiah and how he deals with his people. And it's also the number of new beginning. All these years of important events always ended on the biblical year that ended with 8. The birth of Moses is 2428. The Exodus, which is a Jubilee, was 2508. This was 400 years after the birth of Isaac and 430 years after Abraham came out of Ur. The birth of Yeshua, the birth of Jesus, the biblical year 3958. See how all the 8s end up here? Messiah's 70-week ministry was 3987 to 3988. That's when the Holy Spirit came down. That's when he was crucified. The year 47, 48, after his crucifixion, that year was a Jubilee year also. That was the year 4008. And at that time, the Council of the Apostles were in Jerusalem, and that's when the official outreach to the Gentiles began. And there was another punishment to Israel that started at the same time as the 7 times 390, which is a 2 times 390, a double punishment. And that would have ended in this year also. This is a Jubilee year too. But this is when the outreach to the Gentiles went out. This is when the church came in. This is the era. This is when the ecclesia, when you called the ecclesia out. It was at this time. It was on the Jubilee year. In 1947, 1948, that was a Jubilee year. That is when Israel formally became a nation again. 1997, 1998, that was a Jubilee year. That was a biblical year 5958. And that's when the punishment against the house of Israel ended at this time, I believe. The 2,730 year, 7 times 390 punishment began in 734 BC, but there were things going on with us. I know there was things going on with the body of Messiah. Everybody felt changes in 1997. Everybody who I talked to felt big changes in their lives. 1996 was a big pivotal year for everybody. Big changes were going on, and a lot of things were just going on. And in our spiritual lives and our walks and in our calls. So I have the next Jubilee year, next Day of Trumpets in 2040, I have the year 6001. This is 6,000 years after the creation of Adam, beginning the last Shabuah, 7 weeks preceding the millennium reign of Messiah. The year 2046, is the year 6007, is the last year of the Shabuah begins. This is the last year of the Shabuah begins. It's a sabbatical year. You have 7 times 7, 49 is a sabbatical year, and it ends in the fall of 2047. In the autumn of 47, that's when the year 6008 begins from the birth of Adam. The year 6001 begins from the fall of Adam. This is 6,000 years after the fall of Adam. The great Jubilee year begins on Yom Kippur. The Jubilee years always begin on Yom Kippur in the fall. That's when the Jubilee, according to the book of Leviticus. You go back and read it. It is in the 7th day and the 10th day of that month is when the Jubilee year begins. The Messiah's millennial reign on earth begins either on this day or 13 days later on the last great day, Ethaim 22, after the 7 days of Tabernacles. So this is how I see the biblical timeline according to what is in the constellations and all the signs that are going on in them. And this great sign is going on in 2040. It's an awesome sign. It just happens to be 6,000 years exactly from the creation of Adam. And I didn't come up with this sign first. I didn't come up with this sign until, probably a good 6 years after I came up with the creation date. Then I saw this sign and it sort of really confirmed these things. Now, the return of the Messiah can come at any time. It can come next week. This is the timeline that I've seen from the heavens that it's showing. So if he doesn't come tomorrow or the next day, we absolutely have these days to look forward to. Because people are going to come and saying, it's already happened. I've had so many people call me all the time, and it's going to be next week, or it's going to be next year, it's going to be this month here, and nobody knows. It's up to Yahweh when he decides to do these things. He's going to do them in his timing. We can see the seasons, at least we can be in the seasons of these things. We can see this. But I want these things to go out to people, this generation that just started in 2000, I think it's the last generation. In a year, or in 1 week, in 6 days, there are 144 hours. And then you have the Sabbath. So, and the Sabbath is called the preparation day, the preparation just before the Sabbath starts. So there's 144 hours in 6 days, and then the Sabbath begins. We are in the 144th hour. 143 hours have passed from the beginning to now. We are at least in the 144th hour. We are in the last hour, in the very least. We have to look at it this way. Sometimes it seems like a long time with us. It's a very short time, actually. The earth has endured 143 hours. The whole creation is yearning for the time that the Messiah returns. We have gone through 143 hours, and we are preparing for the Sabbath. Sometimes you spend the whole afternoon preparing for the Sabbath. This is the 1 hour warning. 1 hour left to the Sabbath. So we got to rush around and get ready so we can get everything ready and quiet down and give it to Yahweh. I'm saying we got work to do, so we got 1 hour left. I think what was going on between 1996 and 2000 was to get us on our toes. It's like a 40-year warning. It's like as if Israel was delivered from the time of Moses, they wandered 40 years in the wilderness. You can get all kinds of things from that. But I think it was like a 40-year warning for us to get our act together. If those signs did not occur, I would not be doing this now. If I didn't see those signs, I would not be doing this ministry. So at the very least, it got my butt going, But they are signs for us to see. And as I say, don't Messiah come back at any time. I'm not going to say I know the day and the hour. But this is how the biblical timeline lines up with the heavens and the Jubilees. It does line up that way. And I wanted to share this with you so you can see this. But he may come back tomorrow. But don't fret if he doesn't. He may come back in 2 weeks, may come back next year or 5 years. And, Yahweh bless you all, and thank you for having me here. And it was a pleasure to share these things with you. really enjoyed it. Thank you.